we've got projects that we work on. We do a lot of work with the federal government, specifically on land port of entry jobs. And these projects are like $200 million projects. They're design build. We can win a job and actually get a signed contract and everything sounds exciting. But then we spend the next year, the next 12 months working in pre-con with 30 to 40 people from the client group, the user group, architects, engineers, interior design consultants, acoustic consultants, estimators, schedulers, you name it. But imagine 40 people, every other week, coming together in meetings, trying to decide, okay, what kind of structural system are we doing?
All right, Anthony, super excited about the podcast today. Excited to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brad. Pumped to be here.
Yeah, Anthony and I go back quite a long time. I mean, I don't know, probably 16, 17 years. And Anthony Jeffers is the Director of Project Development for the Southwest region for Hensel Phelps. So that's quite a title, Anthony.
Yeah, it just sounds important, but it's not really.
Well, let me break this down. Essentially your role, Director of Project Development, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so what that entails is, again, just really understanding the marketplace, understanding market conditions, and positioning our team to win work. I often tell people that my job is I'm in the win work department. Our job is to go find clients and win work and keep everybody busy.
So when you talk about win work, though, and this is an interesting topic, just because being in heavy commercial, Hensel Phelps, I mean, for a little background, um, well known for amazing commercial projects all around the country. You guys did, if I'm not mistaken, California Adventureland right at Disneyland. You've done the Phoenix Airport. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, so many projects.
The Pentagon.
Yeah, Pentagon. And so these are projects that are highly complex. There's a lot of work, a lot of planning, a lot of coordination to execute something with, I'd imagine there's litigated damages. I mean, there's all liquidated damages. There's all kinds of aspects to what you do, Anthony. But at the core to being a good director of business development is that relationship side. How are those relationships cultivated, built, especially when you're working on projects of that magnitude?
That's a lot of information there, Brad. Yeah, it really starts with having a good operations background. Uh, in all honesty, I mean, my success and the reason I've been so successful at Hensel Phelps over the past 10 years really comes from an understanding of our core business. We're a builder. We build stuff. And knowing the nuances of contractual obligations, contractual responsibilities, understanding design teams and relationships with design partners, understanding trade partners, supply chain issues, all of this stuff becomes very key and important when we're talking with clients. It comes from being able to understand what separates us from our peers and our competitors, and then knowing how to articulate how we're stronger, faster, or better than somebody else to go win that work, because it's fiercely competitive. It's understanding and knowing what the risk model looks like, because every client's got risks and how we identify those risks. And then our ability to make that personal connection that shows that, hey, we've got the right team with the right experience and the right resume and the right relationships, and we deliver certainty, and here's how we do it. And a lot of it comes from building those personal relationships over time. They don't happen overnight. And some of the procurements that I'm working on take 2 or 3 years. And some of these projects are several $100 million to multi-billion-dollar projects that take months and months, if not years, of tracking and developing and pre-selling and positioning in order to go win those projects. It doesn't happen overnight. And you got to have a good, strong, steady pipeline of projects like this, because some of the procurement process takes so long.
I think it's fascinating on so many levels. The reason being, I mean, you mentioned the client risk, and many of us, you mentioned expertise as a builder, knowing operations, knowing building. You could have taken that to understand the contractor's risk, right? But you mentioned the client risk. How does understanding the client pain points, the risks that the client may have, budget, timeline, I'm sure there's other elements of that with the complexity of projects you're doing. How does understanding that give you a leg up with the competition to win more projects and build that relationship?
Yeah, one of my favorite authors, as you can tell, I love to read books behind me, but Michael Vickers wrote a book called Becoming Preferred. And when we as builders or anybody in this industry who provides a service, when we get to a position where we become preferred, and how we become preferred is really understanding things from the client's perspective. Then we really hit the sweet spot. And that's where doing this work gets it becomes really fun and enjoyable. And what I mean by that is turning the things around a little bit and saying, how is the owner or the client funding this project? Where are they getting the funding from? What kind of contingencies do they have? And what happens if we can't meet that budget? Do we start the project? Does a project get delayed? What about all of the nuances working with municipalities and permitting? What about utilities? And so often, in fact, I just spent the last 2 days, by the way, in training about this exact same topic. So the timing is great. But once we understand, and your business is no different, Brad. You're working with homeowners that are using their personal wealth and assets to go build beautiful luxury custom homes or dream homes or stuff that they've saved, and they're using their 401k or investments to help go fund this. Is really understanding what are their stresses, what keeps them up at night. Can we afford this? What if we can't afford it? Do we not do the pool now? Do we do the pool later? Do we do the RV garage now or not at all? And it's really understanding some of those stress points and decision-making processes that our clients go through when getting money. And again, a lot of the clients that we work with, we do a lot of federal work. In fact, we're one of the nation's, we're the third largest federal contractor in the country. We do about 2 to 2.5 billion a year in federal contracts. Is understanding how that funding comes in from IRA funding, right? Understanding these different appropriations, how those appropriations work, learning those government agencies, whether you're dealing with NAFAC or DOE or DOD, the Army Corps of Engineers, and how they operate. Some of these have mandates to go spend this money, and this is how much money they have. And if they don't have enough and we go price it, and when you look at the current market conditions, they have to go back to Congress and say, hey, Congress, we budgeted this project 3 years ago. We don't have enough money. We went to the market. The market came back and said it was this. We don't have enough. And in order for us to go get this job, we need you to give us $10 million more money. And sometimes that process could take 9 months or a year. And by the time they get the money, things have gone up even more. And it's like, okay, something's got to give here. So it does become a challenge. But again, when we understand the client's risk profile and what keeps them up at night, it really helps us position ourselves better to become a true partner with our clients to win work with them, because they trust us now and they recognize that we're more of a trusted advisor, trusted partner, because we look at things from their perspective. So then we can start to apply all of our processes and procedures and how we do things in a more meaningful manner, because now we really understand it from their perspective.
I think one of the challenging parts, as I'm listening to you, Anthony, is that, being skilled in operations as you were in your team, I would imagine business development and understanding client risks, that's going to allow you internally to make, changes, automation, systems, programming, all these different things to kind of fix this so that it matches, the sales process actually matches the process itself and the end result. What I imagine would be difficult is you're on the front line, you're building these relationships. As you mentioned, it takes years to build, to get to fruition. There's an operations teams behind you. How do you coordinate between pre-con and business development to the operations in a company of that magnitude? Someone such as myself, or let's say they're a small residential builder, most oftentimes they're probably doing the sales and the operation, right? Or there may be 3 or 4 people. You are hundreds and thousands of employees and people. So how is that coordinated, information in and information out?
It's not easy. I'm not gonna lie, it is not easy. Trying to get everybody on the same page is not an easy task. It does take a tremendous amount of discipline, and just to give your listeners, and your audience some scale, Hensel Phelps does about $8 billion a year in revenue. Got over 4,000 employees here in Phoenix. We've got 250 employees and do roughly about 900 million a year in revenue. But the procurement goals, we have to go win a larger amount of work than our burn rate. So, we're setting goals to go secure $1.7 billion in 12 months, knowing full well that our burn rate is 600 or 700 million. And you got to do that. So one of the things that we do is we're very process driven, and we got processes for everything to a point where it's almost obnoxious, right? But we got these processes where it takes a tremendous amount of communication. And my job is, hey, we got all these opportunities. We got this great pipeline. We got this funnel of opportunities. And it's communicating those very early on with the team to say, hey, we got a $200 million data center job. Here's the profile. Here's the quick executive summary. This is the client. Here's who owns that company. Here's their financial backing. Here's their sample contract. Here's how we met them. Here's the design team. Here's the contract. We go through all this litany of stuff, and then we present it to the team and say, okay, here's our competitive advantage. Here's the timing. We're thinking we should go after this because we have this profile. We call it a go, no go score sheet. And we literally go through a profile and we score ourselves and say, okay, if we went after this on a scale of 1 to 25, what would be our chances of winning this? And every single criteria has, a point associated with it. And if we're not scoring like 17, 18, 19, 20 range, it's not even worth our time. And then what we do is because we start to coordinate and say, okay, do we have the right project manager? Is that project manager going to be available? Do we have estimating staff available? And is that estimator, do they know and understand the nuances of that scope of work for that particular project? What else do we have in the queue right now that our estimating team's working on? So, I have to coordinate with our chief estimator. I got to coordinate with, our regional vice president, directors of operation managers, general superintendents. And really, it's all staff-based. It's timing and staff-based. And then also, is the client the right client? Do we want to go work with this client? Why do we want to go work with this client? And what's that relationship going to look like? So there's a whole nuance, Brad, that we go through that requires a lot of coordination and communication with these different entities just to make sure that we're in alignment, because we're all in this boat together rowing. And it's, if one person says, hey, I can't help from pre-con, then we're done. If operations says, hey, we don't have the project manager or the superintendent for this job, we're done. Right. So it does take a tremendous amount of coordination and communication on a weekly and monthly basis. And like I said, at any given time, we're chasing, well, to give you some perspective, we submit on about 45 projects a year. And so when you do the quick math, like every week and a half, we're submitting a proposal and qualifications based and a pricing proposal every, 7 to 8 days. And so it takes a lot of communication and coordination to make that happen.
Well, and I think put in perspective, for each one of those, submittals that you're making, which is almost a week a year, but fairly close, the amount of time, the complexity, because these are not, $500,000 jobs. So, what's the amount of time that lead up just to that initial, presentation?
From what point, Brad? Like give me a starting point.
Okay, well, I guess the starting point is not their relationship being built. Hey, we know this is coming, but maybe there is part of that. I think it's really important for the listener to understand that in these development projects, I would imagine, Anthony, that you're design building these, especially your negotiated work. And what I mean by that is most of us in residential are accustomed to, there's two ways to do it. And in the industry, you'll have a client that maybe gets the plans done with their designer and architect, and then they're like, we're going to go get bids from, 3 builders. Well, those bids come back probably high, they didn't involve the builder. And so, the budgets probably don't align with the vision that they had, and they have this appetite now for this amazing project. They're emotionally attached, and now the budget busts the project. Scenario 2 is, okay, we're going to involve the builder, right? And the designer and the architect, we're going to do this. And ideally, all 3 parties are working together congruently, they're figuring out budgets and they're designing to that budget. But what I found about commercial, probably for you, Anthony, where it's even one step further than that, is that on a commercial level, especially some of the really savvy commercial builders, they're in the sense that, okay, it's negotiated work. So they're involved early on, designer, architect, builder, right? They're involved with the client, except the difference is instead of you 3 creating a budget and working towards it, you're actually bringing in the steel subcontractor. You're bringing in the concrete subcontractor. You're actually designing with the engineers of record, with the architect on a plan, not just for budget, but availability of material, right? Manpower, how quick can it be done? And so you're asking trades to be really involved from a bidding standpoint, not just, hey, here's the bid, go bid it, but they're actually involved in the design, because that's going to help you design and value engineer along the process.
Yeah, absolutely. So with those 2 examples is, Hensel Phelps does a lot of design build work. As a company to date, we've done $43 billion worth of design build contracts. And so we favor that. CM at risk is very similar. I mean, we've done about $40 billion now as a company in CM at risk contract delivery. And so, yeah, it does take the time and the energy in these procurements. If it's design build, we could spend easily 3 or 4 months, if not 6 months, putting together a design build team, understanding the strategy, bringing in trade partners, bringing in sub consultants, and looking at this system and what the client's asking for, and doing qualifications based. Then we may do a price component and doing a price selection. And it's really being able to help the client understand, okay, here's your number one, we're qualified. Here's our expertise to help you with this project. And here's the team we're bringing to help solve your problems. And then when we do the price proposal in that component, it's really understanding, okay, we understand this is your program, and maybe you've already disclosed to us what your budget is. Then what we do is we'll go through and we'll break that up into what we call budget buckets. That, okay, site work's going to be roughly 8%. Mechanical is probably going to be 35%. Steel is going to be 7%. And we start to break things up in like target value design type concepts to help our clients understand that, hey, here's how we're looking at your project and understanding it. Now let's take this team and work collaboratively together to go solve problems and say, hey, does that really align with what you want and what you need? And the time and energy and the number of people that takes. Sometimes we have some of these procurements where we've got 30 people involved in putting our qualifications together, putting our price together, and our proposal on these procurements. And sometimes they can be a pretty heavy lift. I mean, there's times where our design teams can spend well over $1 million, if not $2 million, just in putting design concepts and thought processes and looking at mechanical systems, getting the mechanical and electrical engineer looking at loads and how we're going to design electrical systems and mechanical systems and the interface. So some of these can be very intense and pretty heavy lift just with the number of people hours involved and the amount of cost involved. Does that answer your question, Brad?
It does answer my question. I think it really brings home a point that you're spending 1 to 2 million possibly, just on that presentation and design build process, as a company. You mentioned burn rate earlier, and for those that aren't familiar, walk us through, burn rate and how that, how you're tracking that as a KPI.
Yeah. So for us, as a company, our burn rate's about 650 million a month. And so what that means is that our owner billings as a company are about $650 million. So what that tells us is we have to go win $650 million a month as a company just to stay up with what our billings are. Otherwise, we'll be out of business. Right? That's how we look at it. And a big saying that we've got in our business is that we're always 2 years away from being out of business because, the amount of work that we have to go win every month to keep up with what we're billing per month. That's a good, KPI for us as far as our overall fitness level as a company. And we use that term quite often is like, what's our financial fitness, our safety fitness? What is our fitness level as a company? And if we can win, as much as or more than what our burn rate is, then we've got a good fitness level. So again, annually for the Phoenix office, our burn rate is about 700 to 800 million. So a year. But if we go win 1.5 billion a year, then we're always 2 years ahead of ourselves, right? Because we'll burn half of that off in year one and the other half of that in year two. So the way our business model works as a large commercial contractor is we always want to stay at least 2 years ahead of that burn rate.
Yeah.
And that's not easy to do.
No, and these are big numbers. And what's interesting is, look, by no means are we Hensel Phelps, and we're definitely not working at those numbers. But at the core of it, where it does relate, Anthony, is that any business owner, and it doesn't matter what industry you're in, designer, architect, builder, is you have to understand your burn rate, which means you have to understand your break even, right? What is the nut to crack as a company, and are we fulfilling that pipeline? And I think your example of saying, hey, Hensel Phelps is always passionate that we're always 2 years from being out of business. It's funny because when I meet with my leadership team, I tell them we have, like anyone, you have the day-to-day crisis or, issues and things come up with any project. And you have to have a team that's really focused on that day-to-day, what's happening today so we can get through that. But you better have somebody, Where I stress is I'm not stressed about today. I'm stressed about 2026 and 2027 because to your point, you're looking at, for me, these projects take a long time for me to get off the ground. No different than you, Anthony. So if you're not feeding that pipeline, that estimating funnel, that can come really quickly, especially with the overhead you may have at Hensel Phelps.
Yeah, and a great point, and I'm glad you bring that up, Brad, because again, in my background, I've been a small business owner in the past. I owned a small company back in the '90s, and I know what it's like to figure out how am I going to make payroll. How do I pay all my staff, and how do I pay insurance and bonding and all these other requirements that you have, and it can be overwhelming for a lot of business owners. And I'm sure you've got a large population of your listeners that are smaller business owners that are trying to go run businesses and be successful, and understanding the financial piece. And I've learned that more than ever. You can go win a project and get it under contract, but it still may not contribute to your revenue, because you may spend the next 4 or 6 months working with the client trying to understand their vision and picking out stuff, and like what kind of stone do you want on it, how big of a pool do you want, and you're not really billing or making money in most business models during that time period. You're really trying to understand what the client wants. Perfect example is we've got projects that we work on. We do a lot of work with the federal government, specifically on land port of entry jobs. And these projects are like $200 million projects. They're design build, and we can win a job and actually get a signed contract, and everything sounds exciting. But then we spend the next year, the next 12 months working in pre-con with 30 to 40 people from the client group, the user group, architects, engineers, interior design consultants, acoustic consultants, estimators, schedulers, you name it. But imagine 40 people, every other week, coming together in meetings, trying to decide, okay, what kind of structural system are we doing? What kind of roof system are we doing? What does the foundation look like? What are the site conditions? What utilities are we doing? And you're doing that for a year, and you're not really billing a whole lot during that pre-construction phase. You may, if you're lucky, be billing $500,000 as far as our role, until you get to the big prize of actually being able to go build a $200 million project. So a lot of times we have to really look at, it's great that we want a $200 million job, but what's our billing look like? And our financial fitness is that, do we have 6 or 7 or 8 other projects that we've got going on that are bringing income and billing in as we're trying to go manage these larger projects that take so much longer to get off the runway? Got to be really mindful of that. So hope that helps.
Yeah, it's really important. And then you mentioned, something that's very unique about, your brand at Hensel Phelps and that interview process. You've said this a couple of times about the qualifications, right? You're presenting qualifications. What does that entail? It's very different than my qualifications to win a custom home. You're putting forth, I would imagine, who the team's going to be operating it, resume, similar projects. I mean, walk through how in-depth that qualification process could be just by trying to get to that next level.
It can be crazy. I mean, this is probably for me one of the biggest challenges, and probably the one element that challenges me the most is to understand what the client wants, and then how do we articulate ourselves with our background and our experience to really bring that, weave this fabric together. We've got clients that ask for a lot of detailed information. They want to know everything about, how long has your company been in business? What's your safety record? What's your EMOD rate? EMOD rate is your experience modification rate, which tells clients how safe your culture is and what your insurance premium costs are. So the lower your EMOD rate, the better insurance, or the lower the insurance premiums you have. So that's a benefit to clients. But they ask for so much, Brad, and because you have some exposure to this, and with all your relationships, you have some exposure to this and knowledge of this. But there are certain clients that, hey, in 11 pages, tell me that you're the most qualified firm to build my $100 million project. Give me your approach, put in a work chart together, show me a couple resumes, tell me about, whatever cool innovation you're doing and why we should pick you. And then you got other clients that we work with, like Intel or other manufacturing clients. We do a lot of data center work with different data center manufacturers. and it's like, hey, in 50 pages, tell me, what are all of what are all of Brad's certifications? Where did Brad go to school? How long has he been in the business? How long has Brad been with your company? Does he have OSHA 30 training? Has he been through first aid training? I mean, the litany of questions and qualifications, Brad, for some clients and some of these pursuits can be overwhelming. I mean, literally, it's overwhelming. And we've got a whole entire department that does nothing but review what we call RFQs, requests for qualifications, where we got to scrub it and read it very carefully to make sure that we clearly understand what is the client asking for, how do they want it, what size do they want it, what font do they want it in, is there a certain format? I mean, it's so prescriptive, and some of these clients, I mean, will literally dock you points if you don't follow this stuff exactly. And they want to know, like, are you qualified? Do you have the experience? Have you built 5 projects just like mine in the last 10 years with the team that you're proposing? And if you haven't, then tell me why I should pick you. So it does get fiercely competitive. And this is where we start to introduce some of our competitive advantages to try to understand some different angles. And again, we get creative, right? Clients ask for certain things and we're like, well, we haven't technically done that, but we've done some elements of it. So let's put some elements in there and see how they respond to it, and sometimes we do have to get creative, and it's fun. But there is a lot of technical writing required. And so part of my job and my background as the director for this department is there are times where I have to sit down and turn on some classical music and close my door and literally do some technical writing. Like, what systems are we going to use? What tools do we have to help manage project management and change order management and cost management? And, again, really integrating with our estimating department, our pre-con team, integrating with operations on these technical write-ups, and then going back through and reviewing it, and then asking ourselves, did we answer the question? Did we answer all the questions? Because this particular question had 4 questions in one. Did we answer every one of them explicitly? And if our 14-year-old daughter could read this and say, yeah, I get it, then we know we did a good job. If our 14-year-old daughter looks at that and says, I don't get it, then we really didn't do a good job, right? So there's some litmus test things that we do too, to make sure that we're not being too technical, because sometimes we don't know who all is reviewing these qualifications and these proposals that are part of this selection team that's going to pick us. And so it does create some challenges for us as to sometimes we don't know our audience. We think we do, but we don't. And we've got to write stuff general enough that anybody could read it and understand it. But then also in certain places, we got to be very, very focused and very, very specific for those 1 or 2 super technical people on a selection committee that are looking for very specific things that test us, that say, oh yeah, these guys know what they're doing.
It's an incredible breakdown and very helpful, Anthony. Going through that qualification process, I'd imagine in some cases you have a relationship with a repeat client. And so it's negotiated work, there's a trust, there's a relationship there. What is most competitors you've had as you're interviewing, can you think of a time where you've had X number of companies bid for a certain project? How many? And maybe the second question would be, on average, typically when it's not someone that's a repeat client, how many people are typically, involved on average?
Well, for our industry on the commercial side, typically if there's more than us and 3 other people competing, we'll stay in that arena. But if it gets more than that, we'll tap out. We'll actually kindly decline.
So typically 4 is where you're going to limit.
Yeah. And sometimes on some of these projects, like, we recently won a Lifetime Fitness project here in Phoenix, and there was 3 of us. At the end of the day, it sounded like it came down to 2 of us that were really legitimate competitors because, our processes are similar, our staff is similar, our size and scope is similar. On some of these other projects, I mean, there are times we submit on projects and we find out after the fact that we were the only one that submitted. But if it gets more than 4, we tap out because we feel like the client's really not looking for a specific value, and we don't provide a competitive advantage. And so we don't typically hard bid jobs because we are not known as a commodity, meaning that we're not just a number. We believe that we provide something different. And I would guarantee that most of your listeners would say the same thing. Look, I'm not a commodity. We do have some specialization. We are a professional service. We do provide a little bit of a unique spin on how we do stuff, and they're right. But we try to focus on clients that are looking for true legitimate competitors and looking for a value, right? That the combination of you may not be the lowest, but if you give me a compelling qualifications and a strategy that can help me maybe save some money, maybe save some time, or you came up with a really innovative exterior skin system for my house or for my project or for my hangar, that's worth something. And I'll pick you over somebody else because of the innovation, the problem solving or solutions. And that's really what we try to focus on. So when I'm out there targeting clients and projects, it's really trying to understand who are the clients that are looking for a value and something specific and not just a low number. So again, if it's more than us and three other people, we're not going to waste our time.
Yeah.
How do you guys do that, Brad? How does it work in your business?
Yeah, it's very similar. I mean, in our business, if you have a lot of people bidding, it's definitely not worth your time. Because even at our level, it's too complex. And I'll give a good example. For me, if I'm getting 10 bids for cabinetry, it's almost impossible to compare them, right? And who's including what, who's excluding what, what wood species are they doing? What's the hardware? I mean, there's so many different options when you're thinking, well, they bid per plans and specs, but it's really not. They've made assumptions and they've made different changes. And so, it gets to the point where it's too much. And uh, the, as you think about that as a builder, well, when we have clients that reach out and be like, hey, I'm getting 4, 5, 6 bids. I mean, same thing. How do you really differentiate A from, F, because everything in between? And so typically what ends up happening, they'll take the cheapest price, which get what you pay for, right? Usually the cheapest bid is the most expensive and you pay for it down the road. Um, what we've done to kind of counteract that is, fortunately, like you, a lot of projects, clients will, there's a relationship, there's an understanding, there's a familiarity with us. And so they're willing to reach out and, we work on a cost plus model. So we're very transparent with them. In some cases, they'll enlist us that, hey, Brad, we want you to just bid the project. We're getting a few bids. And in that case, it goes back to the value thing, like you're mentioning, Anthony, that we have to put together our process, our systems, the value, the time commitment to bid a project. And I typically present a proposal of X to say, hey, we're going to bid your project. Here's the amount of time we're going to spend. Here's the takeoffs. Here's the database we have, to give you a really, really accurate number. But there's a fee for that because there's a tremendous amount of manpower and time that our team puts forward. And I found that the really serious clients will pay that fee, even with the risk that you may not get the job and they may not hire you. They're willing to pay that for the time and expertise you're putting into it. And the tire kickers are the ones that just kind of laugh off and be like, I'm not paying for that. So there's no way. You just need to bid it because you're a contractor and that's what you should do.
It's interesting the comment that you made that the clients are willing to pay for it. The clients that are serious is what you said. And what I would believe, and again, based on my 34-year career in the business, that you've obviously done something, Brad, to convey value that the client perceives, and that's why they're willing to pay for it. Because either they can't do it themselves, they don't know and understand the business, they don't have the relationships and know, which, millwork people to call, which, tile and flooring people to call. But because of the process and the relationships that you have and the transparency, serious clients are willing to pay for that. And what we have found on the commercial side, on the projects that we work with, it's very similar. Clients are willing to pay us, for pre-construction efforts to go out and leverage those key, relationships. Like, go find me 3 or 4 really good electrical contractors, and let's get their input on what this project would take and what it would cost. What's the lead times on this stuff? And we're the same way. We're not going to waste trade partners' time by going out to 7 people. We may invite 7 people and get 3 responses, and then we'll work with those 3 folks. But again, when we're serious with our trade partners, we get serious response back, and then our clients get to benefit from that value. And I would think that it sounds like it's very similar with what you do on the luxury home side.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the trade partner side. I think in the process, it's easy for us as the general contractor to take the stance that, we're very, I don't want to say selective with the bidding process, but again, we're negotiating work, we're asking clients to understand our value, and then we go punch down right to our trade partners and say, you guys just need a bid for free, and you guys need to figure this out, and don't really value their time, right? And so I'm glad you brought that up, because something we've been working towards, and I think a good general contractor is gonna have a select group that they feel is qualified for this project to bid. And if you're not sending the same project out to bid 20 times, and you're not wasting their time all the time, their buy-in is going to be a lot better. That, in most cases, most of them are doing a free bid. And in fairness, both ways is the GC's bidding, 1,000 scopes, and the subs bidding one. So it may be a little bit easier for them to bid one project and not be super cumbersome. But at the same time, if they know that they have a fair shot, if they know there's a relationship, if they know they're truly vetted and qualified, and they're not just throwing out a number, you're going to have a much better response. You're going to have a much better integration when it comes to the scheduling and planning and everything that follows down that pipeline.
Yeah, the one thing we've noticed too with that, Brad, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners can relate to this. I'm an electrician by trade. I wore a tool bag. I installed stuff. I got my hands dirty. I mean, these are still rough, callous hands, and I'm grateful for that background. But one thing that we've learned and we've noticed is the more conversations that we have with our trade partners about the client, the relationship with the client, our approach to the project, things that we're considering, things that we're looking at. And again, we've changed this phrase from subcontractor to trade partner. And because it really is, I mean, they're a specialty. Yeah, right. I mean, they're the ones that are the actual craftspeople that are putting work in place. They're in the trades and they're partners. And we treat them like partners. And we ask them like, well, what's your opinion? I was thinking this, and again, oftentimes I do electrical scopes and do bid tabs for electrical work. And I'll reach out to my electrical contractors and say, hey, we got this project. Here's kind of what I'm thinking. And I'll run a few things by them to show that I know and understand the scope of work. And then I'll ask them, what's your professional opinion? Like, what do you think? And what have you seen? What are you doing? And really start to extend that, that hand of fellowship, if you will, or that, branch of trust is we're thinking this, here's how we're approaching it. And, here's some feedback the client's already given us. We want to share that with you so that you can help us be smarter, faster, better, so that if we win the job, we're winning it together. That, hey, if the client selects us, we're bringing you with us because you helped us get here. And what we've learned is, and what I've seen firsthand is the trade partners that are the most engaged and ask the most questions are the ones that we know are serious about the project, that they're not wasting our time and we're not wasting theirs. Likewise, and especially in this market, and that things here in Phoenix are on fire. I'm a fourth generation native. My family's from here. I grew up here, went to school here. I've spent my entire career here, raised my kids, and now I got grandkids here. And Phoenix has never been busier than it is right now. And what that means is our trade partners have choices. Well, do I go work for Brad or do I go work for Anthony? If all things being equal and they're both building a similar type project, who takes care of me and treats me like a partner and respects me and respects the value I bring to the project? And if someone's being more open and transparent and sharing stuff with me in a true collaborative sense, and I feel like I've got a better shot at winning and building my company's resume and securing some work, then I'm going to go put my time and energy and effort with that partner. And so we spend a tremendous amount of time at Hensel Phelps, when we're proposing on these projects and pricing projects, is to develop those more personal relationships with people. And, I personally do this when I reach out to trade partners is I always spend the first, 10 or 15 minutes just catching up and saying, hey, how are you doing? Just, mentally and emotionally, how are you doing? How's your family? How are you holding up? Because I know that everybody out there is fighting in the trenches and there is just all kinds of craziness going on and overcommitting and under-delivering going on in some cases. And, I really focus on mental and emotional fitness with our trade partners and just checking in and say, hey, are you holding up okay? Before we get into the nitty gritty about the scope and the project, how are you doing? And then once I get, a good, check on how they're doing and have that opportunity, then we dive right into it and say, okay, let's talk about this project and what are you thinking and what competitive advantages do you have? Are there some potential, ideas or substitutions or alternates that you've seen? What does this system look like? What does fire alarm look like? What does lighting look like? What about controls? Can you get a better pricing by going with a similar but substitute option? what's readily available versus what's specified. That's where we find, like you said, is that the serious trade partners that want the job communicate and behave differently than those that are just like, yeah, I'll give you a number, but it's going to have all kinds of contingency in there, and I'm going to throw 10% on it because I'm not really serious. And if you call me back, we'll see if we can work something out. But if you don't, it's all good, right? So it's a process of weeding that out too. Is like, what kind of relationship do you really have? And again, people are busy, and we get that. And I try to be very respectful, and so does our team. Is we recognize that everyone is super busy. Here's an opportunity. If you've got staff and resources and this works in your pipeline and in your burn rate and everything else, and you'd like an opportunity to go look at this project with us, we'd love to go do it. But if you can't, we understand. We'll catch you on the next one, right? And just being able to have those great personal relationships and those conversations helps us better serve our clients that are really serious about the projects that they're trying to go build.
People don't care about how much you know until how much you care, right? And I think it's interesting the tactic about how are you doing, because I had call a manager that on occasion, it's tough. And the fact that you were an electrician, just to prep this a little bit, Anthony, and I was too, having worked as a subcontractor, and even if you haven't worked as a sub, even being a superintendent, right, and dealing with the day-to-day chaos that happens in the field.
Been there.
Yeah, and then you become in management. It's pretty easy to forget what it's like being out there, right? And then you get out there and you forget how chaotic it was at times and how much work it is.
It's crazy.
Yeah, but that, there's something to be said about that, in the sense that, I find that when I don't want to say struggling, but it's difficult being in the field, and I'm a manager, I always would come, how are you doing, Brad? And it's funny because sometimes you're like, I'm good. And sometimes you're just like, let me just tell you, and it's like,
I'm falling apart.
Yeah, I'm falling apart out here.
I'm barely making it.
and I find myself as a manager doing the same thing, that there's, especially some of the ones I'm interacting really, as we're working through the, the org chart that, I'm communicating with, I always ask them, how are you doing? Because, most of them are pretty open once you open and you don't say anything and you're just quiet and you listen.
Yeah, Brad. I mean, again, you and I go way back. I mean, we've known each other a long time, and we both have been through some interesting stuff in our lives, no doubt. And I've learned, I teach a lot of classes in the industry, project management classes, estimating classes, leadership classes. And one of the things I've really been focused on here the last couple of years is during my training of these classes, I really focus on mental and emotional fitness level. And why that's important is because I know for a fact from my own personal experience, and I've got older kids that have now graduated from college and have kids of their own. It's a different world today, Brad, than it was 5 years ago. It's a different world today as a project manager or a project superintendent or an estimator or a designer than it was 10 years ago. The stress and the distractions and the expectations and, all of that is just different. It takes a different, I call this like an industrial athlete, is that to be a mental and emotionally fit person in today's world and in this business requires so much more than it did of you and me 10 years ago. And I know that. I'm aware of it. I see it. I've lived it. I know that. And so because I know that, I know that every single person I talk to in a given day is struggling with something, struggling with their marriage, their relationship with their spouse or partner, kids, making silly mistakes, having issues with pets, parents that are aging, financial challenges because the market, everyone's struggling with something, making car payments, helping save for college, trying to get through school, paying off school loans, sick kids, whatever. And again, I've raised 5 kids myself, so I've lived it and I know it. But it is, Brad. And that's really, I think, one of the biggest separators and differentiators in today's market of those companies that truly excel at that next level. And I call it elite level. To be an elite, endurance athlete in this business, we got to spend more time caring about our people and really looking out for their mental and emotional fitness level. And I will tell you myself, I've had times where I've been depressed. I've struggled with anxiety. I've struggled with a lot of things, throughout my career. And there have been times where I have literally had to just call a timeout and say, you know what? I need to walk away for an hour or two. And I got to go wring my sponge out and I got to go figure stuff so I can just kind of get level set again before I engage. Because right now I'm just about ready to start tripping breakers and blowing fuses. And, and being that you and I are both Sparkies by trade, it's just a great little saying for us. But one of the things I've learned about too is, I've got, people that report to me, and I've got an entire department, and I've got staff, and I've got some, folks on my staff that, have struggled. And I've told them, I said, it's okay. I get it. I understand. You don't have to explain anything to me. If you want to share, great. I'm not going to pry into it, but if you do want to, that's fine. But call a timeout and go take care of yourself. If that means you take the rest of the day off, go do it. Because it's just harder. And I think for us as leaders and managers, it's requiring more of us as business owners and business leaders to be on the lookout for this behavior and to really be there to support and strengthen our team because they're all struggling.
Yeah, the unfortunate part about our business, and it's something we've tried to spend more time. We actually had our production meeting, and we had an expert come in about mental health and mental acuity, and how to problem solve and not take things personal. I mean, all the things that we go through in this, the mental gymnastics of being in our field. And the reason it's important because suicide rate and depression and anxiety, and whether it be that leads to alcohol or prescription meds, whatever it may be, it's tough. I mean, it's really hard being in the trades and doing what we do. And I love the term, not so much mental and emotional health, but you're using fitness, and I think that's an interesting spin on it, and not so much a spin, but just a term, because you're taking it to show that anyone that thinks of fitness, it doesn't just happen, right? You're not just suddenly a great marathoner. You're not suddenly a great weightlifter. There's a process. There's a journey. There's discipline. There's a continuation of being consistent on a daily basis, which leads to that overall fitness. And I love that you did that, Anthony, because now mental and emotional doesn't just happen because you are who you are and because you're Anthony Jeffers. There's actually a process and a discipline, and this is a culture you're living and learning over a long, extended period of time.
I've been using that term for a while, probably about the last 7, 8 years. And part of that's because of my own personal fitness journey, being an Ironman and doing, marathons and half marathons and just trying to get in better shape. And one of the greatest byproducts of all that physical fitness has been my personal mental and emotional fitness level has gotten so much better over the years. But why I bring that up, Brad, and why I use that terminology so often now is because, and I'm going to pick on you for a second because I know some of your staff, right? But your director of operations,
Yep.
I know him. I've interacted with him.
Yep.
If he shows up to work tomorrow morning and he and his significant other got into a big argument and one of his children, misplaced his keys, and the insurance company called and said, hey, we didn't get your payment for your last, 6 months of your insurance coverage. When he walks in the door to the office, mentally and emotionally, he's not in that fitness level to deal with you coming up and saying, hey, this client just called on the residence. The roofing material didn't show up. What's going on with that? And oh, by the way, on this other project, we got a plumbing leak and we got some problems going on over there. And then we got this other client calling to say, hey, when is the stone showing up? Again, that individual, your director of operations, when he walks in, he's like, well, good morning to you too, Brad. Nice to see you. Right. And what happens is that because of just the stresses and distractions of life right now, when that happens, people's mental and emotional fitness level plummets, which means they're not capable of dealing with that peppering that you just did, right? Or they're not conditioned right now to go give you answers without feeling attacked or assaulted or embarrassed or shamed or whatever. And oftentimes in this business, and again, I've been in this business for a while, for whatever reason, we haven't established this decorum to say, hey, Brad, I know all those things are important, but man, I'm struggling right now. I'm struggling right now just to keep it all together at the moment. Do you mind if I just, get back to you in 30 minutes? Because right now I'm not even sure if I'm going to be able to, keep it together. Right. And so I've used that term a lot, and I've shared with you, I have two of my children that tried to take their life a couple years ago. It was tough for me as a dad to know that two of my children, for whatever reason, felt like their life didn't matter and they weren't loved or cared about or respected, or their life didn't matter, that they wanted to take their life. And it was hard. And for a while, I didn't tell anybody because I struggled myself to just process that. I took a lot of weight and responsibility on that somehow, some way I failed my kids, and that I messed up. And I didn't tell anybody about it for probably 6 months. And I just carried that. And what it did, Brad, is it affected my mental and emotional fitness level to really show up every day. And you know me, you and I are both very athletic and we're fiercely competitive. It's hard to show up and be competitive, right? And to lift or to run or to bike or swim or whatever it is that you do, it's hard to show up at that level of competitiveness when mentally and emotionally you're just struggling to keep it together because of whatever's going on in your life. And we're not really good about talking about it. And so again, I think it's important for us as leaders and owners of companies and even just peers, even just coworkers, to say, hey, you know what, Brad, you're my brother. Come give me a hug and let's just talk about it. Hey, let's go grab lunch. Forget about work. Let's just go talk. And I'm just here to listen. I'm not going to give you advice. I'm not going to try to correct your problems or fix it for you. But if you want somebody to just sit and listen, and again, this is more, especially for us as men, I think women do this so naturally and they're great at it. My wife's a hospice nurse and she's phenomenal at this stuff. I don't know how she does it, but she's great at it. But for us as guys, we struggle with this. It doesn't come naturally to us because I'm a big fan of Brene Brown, if you know who she is, but she's the queen of vulnerability. And one of the things that I try to help my team understand is I want you to know, as it relates to you and me, I'm letting you know that I'm giving you permission to be vulnerable with me and know that when you do, we're in a safe space, that this is just between us. And I usually start and I say, hey, let me be vulnerable with you first. Hey, I'm struggling today myself. When I woke up this morning, I really was struggling, like, how am I going to get this done? And you know what? I got this going on or I got that going on. And, that vulnerability means something. And that's what helps us as we're more vulnerable to get to that fitness level. Because it does, Brad. I mean, in today's business is that everybody wants stuff super cheap. They want it yesterday. They want it perfect. They don't want flaws. And just a level of accountability standards that we're held to can be overwhelming and stressful. And being able to understand our mental and emotional fitness level on any given day basis, at least for me, what it's done for me over the last 7 years has really helped me deal with and manage all the stuff that I got going on so that at the end of the day, it doesn't completely wipe me out.
It's amazing, Anthony. And I think you led to this too, just building on this, not only the expertise in project management and, you know, just understanding your team and being able to be empathetic, right? To remember what it was like back then. I mean, something that sets you apart is you have a education level at a very high level. Walk through your education level. I know you went back to school. What was that decision? How did that impact things?
Wow, you actually remembered that. I've kind of forgotten about that. Yeah, so no, you're great about that. Um, education is only as good as you use it and what you use it for. And, I grew up in a family. My dad was in the military. My dad was in special intelligence in the Army, HUA, was in the Army for 22 years. And my mom worked in retail. Neither one of my parents had a college degree. Neither one of them had any certifications, and neither one of my parents really held any positions of prestige or leadership or management. I mean, my dad was great because he was in special intelligence. So he was exposed to, top secret clearance stuff in the military from 1960 to 1982. I took an interesting journey. I worked in the field first for 8 years before I decided to go back to school and got my undergraduate in business management. Then I went back out in the field, was a superintendent, was a project manager, worked in estimating, did some business development, and then realized that I wanted to be smarter because this business is fiercely competitive. And again, this is just for me. I wanted to feel like I could be more competitive in such a competitive marketplace. And, I studied architecture at ASU, transferred out and got a business degree. I did work for an architectural and engineering firm for 3 years, and I love that perspective because it helped me understand how architects and engineers think. And it's actually made me a better builder because of that experience and that background. In high school, I took drafting classes and AutoCAD classes in high school and was very passionate about that. And but in college, after I got my undergrad, I went back out in the field and learned how to build and learn how stuff came together and really understood, how projects come together and what happens out in the field and, learn how to swear and throw hard hats and all that good stuff that you learn out in the field, but learned a lot and it was great. And as I got through my career, I just realized that I needed something inside me just triggered that said, Anthony, if you're truly going to be successful and have an impact on this business and this industry, you got to get to the next level. You got to have a better understanding and a better perspective. So I think we were both in the same neighborhood back then, but it was like 2008.
Mm-hmm.
I went back and went into the MBA program at ASU, studied in the MBA program, and focused my minor on international business management, specifically on joint venture partnerships. Had the opportunity to go to Koblenz, Germany, where I was born in Frankfurt because my parents were in the military. And Koblenz is just outside of Frankfurt, about 45 minutes up the Rhine River. And so I studied monetary and fiscal policy affecting the European Union. And why I did that is because I had the opportunity to live in Denmark for a couple of years. I served a mission for our church. And I learned to speak Danish and learn to read, write, and translate and speak the Danish language and the Danish culture. And while I was there, the euro was introduced about 6 months before I came home. And, the Danes had a currency of crowns or krona. And so they had the Danish crown as their currency. And then the EU, which is based out of Frankfurt, Germany, that sets monetary and fiscal policy for all of Europe, they came out with the euro. And I thought it was fascinating, and I was just intrigued by it because I didn't know and understand anything about it. So as part of my MBA program, I had the opportunity to go back to Koblenz, Germany, and worked with Dr. Michael Frankel, and got to meet a lot of great people in Germany and understand how the European Union works. And then came back home, finished that up, and then I went and did a master's in construction management at ASU in the Ira A. Fulton College of Engineering. And that was really just for me to just, get smarter and better, really understand more of the technical sides of construction management. As part of my master's in construction management, I focused on estimating and estimating processes and outcomes. So I defended my thesis on estimating outcomes, of understanding how much process is too much, how much is just right, and how much is not enough to get the same consistent outcome. So did that answer the question as far as my background?
It did answer the question. And I want to be careful of your time too, Anthony, because you've been phenomenal. And honestly, I think I could talk to you all day. So you just are so insightful. And that's why, the relationship we've had for such a long time, going back to just how that experience has catapulted you in your career, having that knowledge, especially as you mentioned, you've used that experience, that knowledge, that education, as you've put together the qualifications, and written, very detailed language, and and how that plays into the business development. You mentioned that so many of your projects are long play, and so now as you have a great reputation with Hensel Phelps and you've sold a lot of business, big book of business over the years. I don't want to say your leash is long; it's just an understanding, but it takes time to build that. So over time, whether you're managing other business development managers or your boss was managing you, how has that freedom been, to make sure that you're performing? How do you really track business development on something that's, 3 years in the making?
Yeah. So I'll start with the first part of that question. I'm actually taking some notes here to make sure I capture that.
There's
as I said,
questions there for you. So
no, but it was good. I loved it. As I said earlier, education is only as good as how you apply it. Yeah, I got a certificate, got to walk across the stage. Yeah, take some photos. Um, a lot of things that I studied and memorized, I don't even remember, right? I mean, I've forgotten a lot of that stuff. Um, it did help me learn how to multitask and prioritize, though, because when you're doing, I was working full time, and I went to night school. I went and did the evening MBA program, and trying to go figure out how to balance all this stuff. I think that probably was the first real exposure for me in the lab of understanding mental and emotional fitness level to get all this stuff done, to meet all those expectations. The education helped me challenge myself to look at things from a different perspective and not the norm or not the stereotypical approach. And I do recognize I'm an anomaly in our business, and just the style and approach. But the education matters because, especially in my role and my position, because I interface with people from all different countries, different ethnicities, different backgrounds, and I've really got to be proficient at connecting with people where they're at and being able to create common ground and synergy with them and do it very quickly to be able to create those relationships. So the first part of your question was about the education. People often ask me, like, did the MBA really help you that much? And I'm like, well, it depends on what your perspective of why you're asking the question. I met a lot of great people. I met people from India, from South America, from the Middle East, from all over the United States, people here that live in town. And again, just really trying to understand a different perspective of how to go solve business problems. That's really what my MBA did for me. It helped me solve business problems, working together as teams and different perspectives. The second part of your question was, let me go back real quick. One of the things that my educational background has helped me with is it helps me relate to people easier and faster. That really has been the greatest benefit of my educational background. And it's also one of the reasons why I read so many books, is because I feel it enables me to connect with all different types of people faster and easier and really connect on a personal level. The second part of your question is, how has that helped with regards to, having the stamina to go do business development and these time frames and everything else? It takes a lot of knowledge and experience to do this job. I'm not going to lie. And I report directly to our, regional manager and vice president who runs our region. It requires, great technical skills. It requires scheduling and planning. It requires anticipation, right? So all the skills that you learn as a project superintendent, which you and I have both been there, a project manager, you and I have both been there, an estimator, you and I have both been there, client relationships and business development, you and I have both been there. It takes a culmination of all those different skill sets and personalities and characteristics and traits to do this job and do it successfully, because it literally does require all of those skills to come together in a very short, compressed period of time to get all this stuff done when you've only got 2 or 3 weeks to respond to this stuff, and then figure out how to manage and create that stamina and that fitness level to deal with all the other procurements and keep all these balls in the air and juggling it at any given day. So, it all comes together of how do you leverage it to satisfy the requirements of what is needed to get done. Yeah. It's hard. And there are days it's exhausting, Brad. You know that. I mean, there are days where I feel like, man, I am awesome. I got it together. We did it. We kicked butt today. And there's other days where I'm like, what the heck am I doing? Do I even know how to do this? And like, everything's falling around me, and there are times where it does feel like that. There are times where it feels like, holy crap, like, how are we doing all this? And are we going to be able to get this done? And there's other days where it's like high fives and, oh yeah, we did it. We nailed it. And there are days where there's highs and lows, but it's the stamina. That's why I go back to that mental and emotional fitness level. The fitness level matters most, because the day in and day out grind and the mental and emotional roller coaster that we go on from day to day, week to week, the fitness level is what gives us the stamina to keep fighting in the ring, week in, week out, month in and month out.
It's incredible. I mean, Anthony, you've been phenomenal, and I can't thank you enough. And um, for those listening, let us know what you do for fun and where they can find you.
Yeah, so for fun, I love skiing, love to play golf, love classic cars. I own a Corvette. I love my Corvette. It's a fun little ride, and just love spending time with family. Where you can find me, my email address is ajeffers@henselphelps.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn and other social media on Facebook. So,
Anthony, you're a rock star. I mean, honestly, just incredibly savvy, very knowledgeable, and what you perform at Hensel Phelps and in the industry, it's not matched. So appreciate you coming on today.
Brad, happy to help. And again, if any of your listeners would like some help on strategy, execution, how do you do this? I've helped quite a few people in the industry, and I'm happy to do it just because I've been doing it for 34 years. If anybody wants to bounce some ideas off any of your listeners, I'd be happy to help any of them. And you can help them get, I can give you my contact information. They can reach out to me if they'd like some help or just an opinion.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Anthony.
Awesome, Brad. Thank you.
If you get value from the show, please support us by giving a 5-star rating and review on whatever platform you listen to. And I also have a favor to ask. We've had some incredible guests that come on and share their wisdom, their knowledge about their business. So if you have friends or family members that could benefit from those episodes, please share it with them, as well as any other business owners that you're networking with that could get value from the podcast or certain episodes. Please share those as well. Again, subscribe, make sure you're following. Any questions that you have, topics. We've had listeners reach out about certain guests that we should have on the show. Again, brad.l@aftconstruction.com. Email me for topics to address, guests that we should have on, and even if you think you'd be a great guest for the show. So again, thank you for all your support, and we'll see you next time.